Welcome to Lesson 3. This deals with the issue of responding to naysayers, which is another way of saying what numbers 4 and 5 here say in this list. Does your essay anticipate readers' objections and questions and respond to them adequately? And then number 5, does the essay consider and evaluate alternative solutions and either refute them or recognize and respond to them? All of which is a way of saying, do you include counter-arguments in your argument? Do you include different points of view and objections and questions, and then respond to those well? If you look at this chart we've talked about before, obviously a good problem-solution essay needs to really define a problem and really give good reasons for your solution, but the book suggests that there's another challenge to this kind of essay, which is you need to bring in, on some level, to some extent, objections, questions, and alternatives, or at least some of these. Why would you do that? Why would you say, well, some might disagree with me, or there are other ways of solving this problem? Well, the point, of course, is that doing so makes your proposed solution seem stronger. And if, in the end, you bring in objections that are stronger than your proposal, well, then you need to either find a good way to respond to them or change your proposed solution, perhaps, because you don't want these to weaken your argument. You want them to, in fact, strengthen your argument. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if you think about my proposed topic in the last video, community service ought to be a requirement for college graduation, you can probably think of lots of objections and questions. Forced volunteerism isn't really volunteerism. I've heard that, or isn't really volunteering. I've heard that from students before. Requiring something defeats the purpose, totally changes the idea of service. Students have too many obligations as it is. Questions: what does community service have to do with education? Nice idea, sounds nice, but why as part of school? What sort of volunteering do you mean? Who's going to arrange all this? Who's going to handle the details? And then alternatives. If colleges made it an opportunity, not a requirement, the results would be better for all. That's a different proposed solution or a proposal. Since high school is required, why not make it a regular part of the high school day instead? And many high schools do that. All of these are the sorts of things my readers would think of if I were making an argument for this thesis. And therefore, I need to think of them and respond to them and say, yes, I understand this, but here's what I think instead. So that brings us to this. How should you respond to these? As I said already, the point is to make your argument stronger. It all depends on the argument you're making and the counterpoints that you raise, but a few general rules apply. Let me kind of give you some general advice here. First, do not dismiss a serious argument. If I see anything in essays, I see this, where students will bring up counter-arguments, but they dismiss them too quickly, or they say the people who think that basically are stupid. That's a huge mistake, because that in fact detracts from your credibility and your strength as an arguer. And for some of the same reasons, I would say it's almost never a good idea to be sarcastic. It's easy to do. We do it in our everyday speech all the time. But that's another way to dismiss a serious argument. You don't want to sound sarcastic in your essay, because it takes away from your credibility instead of adding to it. Third one, if an argument is strong but yours is stronger, then of course how you respond is you refute the point and redirect attention back to your proposed solution. This becomes another way to show your solution as superior. Look, that there are these other ideas, there are these other alternatives, however, they have these weaknesses and mine does not, or something like that. But then this is most important. If an argument is stronger than your response to it, you have to do one of two things. You have to either reconsider your position and revise your thesis, and maybe tone down your argument. Maybe I would say, in the end, schools should strongly encourage and reward volunteerism, but not require it. Or, second, you need to recognize the strength of the point and reframe your argument in a way that recognizes that counter-argument. And what that means is giving ground, making concessions as a way of saying, yes, I realize the truth might be in some middle ground here. Something our politicians have such a hard time doing, it seems like. All of which makes your argument stronger. So what I want you to try in your notes is to brainstorm again a list of possible objections to your proposal, possible questions about your proposal, and or alternatives to your proposal. Now some of you might be able to come up with several alternatives, but few objections. Maybe others will have lots of objections, but not so many alternatives, etc. But come up with, I think I said, 5 or 6 possible objections, questions, or alternatives. And I said at this point, don't worry about whether you'll use all these in an essay, but the more you come up with, the more you can play devil's advocate, the more material you do have to choose from in your paper, and maybe you'll bring in these in some interesting ways. Then pick 2 from your list that you think you should respond to in your essay, and for each, write a response of at least a few sentences, maybe a paragraph. And once again, the more brainstorming, the more writing you do here, the more material you have to use directly in your essay, which you'll be doing next. So consider this, in a sense, not just a hoop to jump through, but part of writing your paper, drafting your paper.